아래 당주들이 저게 주에디기 당주 두신에 냠밀제래야 맞아 삼로 로장야라 간에 장고래네 당보 근데 지게 냐와다 가소다 근데 지게 눈도디게 삼다시 근데 솔야 안지게 류기 차네 안 최냐야 다 개어주비고 고가비어 말에 근데야 안지게 최 냠밀이 림바 말랍지게 땡게 계획신야 요 말에서 지사 디네 메가삼 안 건조게 지게 디유트비게 규사야디 베 깔레하보다 공부 쉬우레샤스 에나다 동아기 요야기 규 디바다 지게 디벨레가 자와체드네 베 지게 베주이제네 안 지게 무드이제네 다 기에네 마시바도 데니게 디벨레가랴 지게 도시고레스 데니게 삼다 다 데니게 삼다요 토네야 나 소소랑랑 삼다베나 당아랑나 안디리 밀리톱 안 리딩이 리기 차네나 안지가 소소게 튕긴 차네 소소게 최냐야기 다 소소야 개와주야 당 안지게 미개와 방야게 돈달라 자와체리아 소소는 뉴바여바 예디바지레 안델이야 소소게 뉴바여바 디강리아 소소량랑리아 람 냠닝진바 땡게 안나상기기 최여바 안델이야 땡게 라마 개위신이 여바데 배야 오래샤서 디네기 여바여바디 미데 지게 뒤수티 철라마다지 디된랴 베즈디가네 고합디 베즈렌지 주기야 삼베게 도치네 삼레다지네 아주 기회 자와데 강도도 베즈치네 주야다 대안의 존주치네 안데 가신 주신 안에 무퇴치네 주고 그래서지 다시게 온도치네 가지고 지게 직슈슈버와 안디마세 당아주게 겨체델리아 겨주제 겨치말 하다 미고 바로 토바이나라 다데체델리아 소소미루 리톱되어데 이나 다 나중에 둥알레 타르진 사람이 가서 미 디기 분선 속바데 녀아 요르데 이나양 다 디기 따다 디겨르베선 디겨 말에스 다 타로 토비어 말에 땡기 대와 토비어 말에 땡기 둥아 세요 말에 노 둥아 요야레 데니 인자 데레 땡델리아 고비여베델리아 아니 땡기 둥아 세세 타로토비게 냠는지 지긴 삼베게 두스네 삼다지 겨주고 그래서 내가 또 내님보데 가서 다 삼로다나 로장나디 두스장고래 센디시 쇼게 디고르만 주바르다.
Good afternoon. So this morning, in the verses we looked at there, we're once again looking at how to train our mind. So the Lama Tsongkhapa presents that we should first look at the situation of beings other than ourselves, those in the lower realms, such as animals, then others in the human realm, to recognize the great difficulty that they have in accumulating virtue, especially those in the lower realms, how it's nearly impossible for them to accumulate virtue, because there's no one who can guide them, or rather, they cannot be guided because of their limitations. Their limitations in terms of understanding language and so forth. And so therefore the situation they find themselves in is really one that is quite helpless, in that they really struggle to accumulate new causes that could potentially lead to their rebirth out of the lower realms. And looking beyond just the lower realms to also include the higher realms, there we see the vast majority of beings too are engaged in primarily non-virtuous behavior. Again, doing so without realizing that what they think is a path to happiness, or a technique by which happiness will be attained, actually leads to the accumulation of causes for further suffering. Thereafter, we were encouraged to look at our own situation and recognize how, when compared to the vast majority of beings, including within our own realm, that we have really an incredible opportunity. We are truly fortunate in that we have good material conditions. We have met all the favorable circumstances that are required in order to be able to transform our mind. We've met a spiritual teacher, we have an interest in the teachings, and we also have the mental intelligence and the capacity to hear and understand, think for ourselves, investigate, analyze for ourselves. So the second part of the meditation is to recognize just how fortunate we are. That leads to the third, which is the determination not to let our opportunity go to waste, not to take it for granted, but through recognizing how rare it is what we have achieved, to make the very most of this opportunity and to live a life striving to cultivate virtue. And we also looked at what is meant by virtue, wholesome minds, as opposed to non-virtue being unwholesome ways of thinking. Moreover, in one of the verses, it was also presented that we shouldn't be satisfied with merely accumulating causes similar to what we've accumulated in the past, causes that lead to a good rebirth, no matter how rare and precious such rebirth is. This rebirth, as we know, is still bound within the suffering realms of samsara. Hence, we experience so many unwanted circumstances. Therefore, we should utilize this life to also accumulate the causes that will eventually lead to liberation, a complete freedom from suffering. Continuing now with the 8th verse. You have a meager collection of wholesome deeds and have unceasingly gone in the direction of harmful behavior. Because of that, you have found this opportunity, this door to happiness and excellence, the Buddha Dharma, just this once.
Samdana doing Stangoresor, Daja Lebra JP, Samba Me, Nieju Gola, Gumi Chidu Chu said, Daja Lebra, Membi, Samba Me said, Daja said, Naranzo Siwada, Naranzo, and the Leba said, Kiwi, Digu to it, Leba said, Dikis, Deva, Digu, you, and the Gawa, Saya Delia, Deniki Bichu, Jedi, Gawa, Bichu Saya did that, Jepas and the Bichu Jepas, the Niki Gawa Saya did. Lebar Jebasin, Lebars and Dikit, Jebasi, the Union, Roger, Jasan, the Union, you, and Yangazo, the Summer Tanche, Sayadi, Jeside, Bed, New Shushi, some message, Luchin, res, and do some down res order.
The first line, you have a meager collection of wholesome deeds. So this recognizes that thus far we have certainly accumulated wholesome deeds, we have accumulated virtue, but the amount that has been accumulated has been meager or modest.
Chike ngarazo rang sam dabe na su je ami jeba ne so dadi ba do so so lo zero chika je drowe je lo cheka ji drowe ji je jab da ji jaba na andi rin le ya dang ju ge ngewe jawa ka ji ju yo res se de dang ju bu chu jin de ji be ne lo be she jong ju den ju ju ni shu ma le ba do gewe jawa ju ye be nyu nyu ro wa bu jung ju son bu ra che and dine aje de anjo lobjong shanda lobjong che da dine ma du ju ge che ne dine nyu nyu shu cha de gro wa che sa da dine lobjong twen se na yang chi so su ge je ga wo ni wo ji ya da an ji yang je ge lia ga le ya dine dun du she ne ndo du lia ge wi cha wa du ya de be nyu nyu re cha chi du se ji ya be na da ge wi cha du ya be nyu nyu re cha de du she ne sam dang go le so sam da da je ba che tan ba so na ga jo ge wi cha wa ga ji du sha we all
encourage then here with this first line to look at our life thus far. So for all of us, we have a varying number of years since our birth until now. But where has our mind been focused for much of this time? So when we were in our childhood, our attention would have primarily been on playing and having a good time. And we got a little bit older, then on education. So this is where our focus was, as opposed to cultivating minds of virtue. And then when we got a little older, we continued with our education, having relationships, and then entering into our career. So these were the varying classes of thoughts that dominated our mind, and then the varying activities that followed from that. This is what we have primarily been focusing our attention on.
Ondu samdane nyun chadire di maji an juge logic nala ene kewe chawa kasi tutus ana daochi nala ane nimichi nala nimichi le shoge ya la ne konta ma menye partu di parade kewe samma kasi koudus ondu che samda de azu shoge ya la tu ya da ji dine shoge sa samda den maji pazu joya samda de kewe cha ju 주에 배 니미질 삼다면에 지게 가브리엘야 계획자 삼도 균에 막호가서 지게 막호 가브리엘 사지 코라 되는 용으로와 제가 디두 삼다네 제상은 저 개와사에 배 뉴뉴레샤서 다 디네 수두 삼다네 소소의 계획자와 사바디 뉴이 임바하고 그래서 다자 레버 제비 삼바메스도 소소라나 디기 녀야게 유 개와사에 배 뉴뉴 임바도 두 삼단하고 그래서 두 신의 삼단 그래서
In this analysis, looking over one's life, also then look at our last year, or our last month, or today, or how we live most days. And we recognize that our days largely filled up with activities, so our mind is scattered following various activities and a wide variety of thoughts. Most mornings we get up, we brush our teeth, we have breakfast, and then we start our day. And our mind is continuously on varying activities that need to be done. There's very little direct focus on cultivating virtue. Hence, our wholesome deeds are so meager.
다 예주 고라 규미치도 초세도 다 저기 예바로 시간에 지기 삼다 도시네 다 예바로 같이 지기도 삼다 왜나다 예 예주 세대가 동아요 이거 규다 직디바셔야 돼 저기 규디 약간 싸울란 다 부춘진의 게는 아주 맛이 받을 삼다나 부춘줄래 콜라요로와 춘주나 콜라사라 안데 본 도서지도 거지 콜라라야 밀리아직 야나 밀리아 안지 너버게 야나 무슨 일 너버게 되네셔다 아니 야세야슬레도 야셔지도 안지 콜라라야레 밀리아 안 준시야 싱그로와 아니 구마자 싱그로와 어두 신데네치는 야 처처도 내지게 밀리아 고라타야레 준시야레 투보자레 두 신데네기 지게 가시는 구마자레 데네 가시는 셈저 소주자레 두신 레용도 제가 데네기 예주 요고 제가 저기 동아녀의 그다 고세의 교 아니 미게 와텔이야 아니 균도 규미치도 저 선디는 모두 이제는 그디나 직두스네 레팅에서 책도 와서 되네게 삼다이다 디나 생각 저기 게네 마시바도 삼다위나라 로직나라 삼다위나 다오직서 삼다다 니미질 삼다다 니미질 양서 공로 가슬리기도 나 차바로 가네 기념마 가네스기도 삼다베네 되네게는 모두 이제는 지게 그디나 되네게 직디양서 그디 양생야서 용도가서 차고 그래서
The second line, and having unceasingly gone in the direction of harmful behavior. So in the same meditation, we look at where our mind generally, naturally goes, and what our resulting behavior is. And we will come to recognize how easily afflictions arise, and then we act under the influence of the afflictions, following minds of desire, getting annoyed and frustrated and angry, and perhaps easily taking life, insects and so forth, perhaps even doing so with some pleasure. We recall our behavior, we watch how our mind generally goes, and we will recognize just how habituated we are to harmful behavior. For example, one may notice that one easily tells lies, easily deceives others, maybe as a joke, maybe to get something that to get your way, to get an advantage in a particular circumstance. And we also recognize that when the mind is non-virtuous, how often then we are actually quite concentrated and we are acting with intent. Here, one comes to watch just how the mind moves without any control, just following its various stimuli, and so often accompanied by the afflictions. So in this way we come to recognize how we unceasingly go in the direction of harmful behavior. And here this word direction has the meaning of creating causes. So we unceasingly create causes for harmful causes which will lead to future suffering.
Dinige samda that do sina dang jugi that do samda du ngara jugi gewe jawa che di nyunyu che an dibi jawa che di bes mangboro jik dinige hago tugur hes 진짜 하고 투원에서 당한 주기 대신에 셰바나 정한 주기 디기 주 개와레스 개와사이드레스 동아 유미가와레스디 또 진짜 다 주기 디기 주 개와시라 싸면 뉴유레 삼삼다이도 안 갈리기데 오 당에디 지뉴유디 뉴유마도 민도 다디 야르게다 지만 싸우고 선배게 샘슐 마선에 레야 지금 거봐 또 삼다도 되네게다 개외자와 뉴유인바 하고 디비자와디 무디 제기요바다 하고요도 아니 오다디 고야딩 아주 개외 개와사고 거래 제 디비 디기 개와사고 거래 지산디 뉴뉴마도 참은 다딩아 샘슈체네 지게 야 베즈체제 아니지 마사고도 선배게다 두신에 삼는다야다 전주기야다 되네기 야 지 야게나야래야 용 개발도 용거래 이 마신 바이나 되네 하 먹어봐나 아주 낭매지 쇼르드네 아니 약도디 가제예마 하 먹어도 아니 노르 차이 냥아 여러바 되는 두신 심지 하고 바이나 개외자와 사야랴 듬바게야다 전주기야다 배수 숙체를 핑거와 되네신 인자 삼당거리 두신 제바지 그래서
With these two lines, we're being encouraged to really watch our mind, get to know ourselves well, and see the general direction that we are habituated towards going in, or the general direction our mind goes in. And this is of great importance to do, because we'll come to recognize that certainly virtuous minds do arise, sometimes intentionally, sometimes spontaneously, but they are quite weak in strength and quite rare. Hence, our collection of wholesome deeds is meager. Whereas on the other side, we recognize just how easily afflictions arise, and the afflictions dominate and guide our mind. And therefore we can come to recognize that our non-virtue is abundant, whereas our virtue is meager. The outcome of this reflection should be a determination arising within to alter the general direction of our way of thinking. Because whilst one may not want to see faults within oneself, having this knowledge, though, is empowering, because we are not helpless. Having this knowledge, then, seeing our current state, then we can see the need to apply ourselves with vigor, with effort, to transform our mind, to change the general direction of our way of thinking, and thereby to radically improve our situation. Here, the first step is to cultivate knowledge, to come to know what our situation is. Then we can strive to change. Without knowing the general situation of our mind, we'll continue to wander around lost in confusion.
아니 대치를 대래 고르고 투된당 제비 고합nye 바 대리 잠스데 지산 대치를 세도 당아도 대지 당보 삼다제 개와사야디 아니 중요요인 바다 디버사야디 지망아지 용도 선배 삼다 하고 있는데 대치를 제자다 개와사야디 마르다야다 아니 지 디버사야디 뉴다야게 된다라 안 대치를 되네자 대래 고르고 세 대래야디 아주 대기 세월아 류대와 아니 지게 셈기와 대기 되네게 유 아니 Tibetan dance 투바상이 쯤된 대기 송샤베 나주게 남냠리 림바디서 냠리지 림바디 Tibetan 바시도 되네게 템바디 대단 자와시도 되네게 템바텔이야 지 냠린 람 땡지베 텔이야 냠린지고 고급라와디 즉 빼야고래서 제위 고급nye 봐 대리점 대링점래 대링아 되네 고거를 빼야고래 선배게 두치네 심주치네 진짜 대리대지 유반 하시래 되네게 삼당고래 해세래.
And the verse continues, because of that, you have found this opportunity, this door to happiness and excellence, the Buddha Dharma, just this once. So here we recognize, or having come to recognize our situation, that our virtue is meager, but our non-virtue is abundant. But despite that, we have now come to meet the teachings of the Buddha Dharma, and thereby we can enter through the doorway or create the causes that lead to lasting happiness and excellence. So this is something to firstly recognize, and then secondly, to truly value, to appreciate.
제가 대리점 시대 되니고 고거를 대리점래 라이도 제가다 나서다 냐와다 이다 둔로 나서는 게네 되니기 냠내지고 고급 윤회매로다 지게 근데 살레네 되니기 라 아니 지게 라 체름보나다 되니기 라 망고 되술이야 최지야 고급 윤회라고 말해 되네레스 제가 디링한주다 나랑 밀리아 계신 되니기 대시 쇼거 슈바나신 대상보 소수기 원의 튼예 차상 차대바 랑기 원의 튼예 차와신 랑을 랍딩게 되네 지기 튼예 차와 예대바데 고급 되네 푼선 소요바데 다디 디레샤 데링잠서 다디 디레샤 냐마 나송라 계바나 디 고급 민도 다디 밀리게 되바 델 고급도 되네 라샤 다디 가랑 되네 고급도 다다딩이 되네 야고 마제바이나 마오바나 양 나서는 길어나 디네 고브라요 말아. 제가 디링점 세드 디링 고급이야 라와데 빼야고래 세드야 고급디 야고 임바데 하고베 토네 다 딘델이야 소소기 제나 차상지 투와 제 줍투와 여반자 다 디네기 상예기 송시베 남된델이야 지 소소기 무티제 냠레 지긴 선배 삼당 고래 제리다 삼다지 냠레 제고래 송고르다.
The verse concludes with just this once. So this then should be it's taken in our meditation as a wake-up call. That through what we've reflected here and in preceding verses, we come to recognize that as opposed to the vast majority of beings, those lost in the suffering lower realms, those distracted in the higher realms of humans or gods, distracted by their pleasures and varying activities, compared to them, what we have achieved, this opportunity that we have attained, is incredibly rare. And here we should be coming to the conclusion to not take this opportunity for granted, to not expect it to last or necessarily be attained again. Because the danger is that because this life is all that we can recall, it's too easy to take it for granted, to expect a life like this to come again, or for this life to last. Not taking it for granted then, we will strive to accumulate the causes for happiness and excellence, to cultivate the Buddha Dharma within our own minds.
안두신의 삼당고래서 지나 제 냐마 보여디와이나 가담바 다 참바 냠는 지겐디기 되네 도가보다 더 나보로 망부지 캐샤세 안에 직쇼에는 저 공다바도 수수게 바삼다 직 되스 디비 삼로로 다 되스 되게 삼롱 안벨 코르도 더 나보지 rum내샤고 레지레 안다 되스 계획 삼로 땅에도 삼로 코르도 도가보지 비샤 지나도 자는 지지자들 공다를 마다에도 장기적으로서 지나 디링 쇼겐 수야라제 미개와 도가보 같이도 나보 같이도 장기적도 디네 나포망아 여베네 다딩이 미기베 디비자와 삼는 엠바디게 마 다샤스 지산 가보도 뉴아마도 다민도 섬이 오다 상인능이디 가보도 지야다도 마 지긴다선 베심주게제 두신제는 안도신 대야지도 안도냐면 지기지도 또 가보도 말마마도 더 나보 뉴뉴뉴스 저도 디네 삼로 야게 두수스 두고래 디네기 심주치고래스 지고래제래 된님마디와 디네기 예, 저야는 마디와 디네디 지고라세 두스 갈롭 난구도와 이런 것들이야 되네 갈롭 난거를 기한주 두시는 냠는 지간 두시고라세자 남녀한테 되네 맞는 sometimes the show when the Garcia Ding Marogota. The dog of a Napotan Shabanum, dog of an hour was a Dijangi Mazio, didn't dog of Mangayuna, Givijawa, some Manga Chevere, some Mangatare, don't have Mangayuna, DB, some of the Mangatare, which is a dinner the Hagoydu, and the Sani Delia, Chiki Givijawa, some Mangata, and Yanjik, Jambatin, Mangatam, this Yamnaji, Jungoro, or Dusin, Jigores.
There was a Kadampa master in the centuries prior to Lama Tsongkhapa who had a practice that became well known. When he was in retreat, he'd be very mindful of his own mind, and when each time virtuous thoughts were dominant, he would place a white stone in one pile, and when afflictions or non-virtuous thoughts arose, he would place a black stone in another pile. And he would watch his mind throughout the day. When it came to the end of the day, time to lie down after another day in retreat, he would count up the two piles of stones and keep a record. And then every evening, he would set the determination, tomorrow, a few more white stones, a few less black stones. And when he rose in the morning, he reminded himself of that determination. And the entire day, each and every day, he observed his mind, guiding her towards being ever more virtuous and ever less afflicted. And through this process of persistence, he was slowly able to change his habituation from afflictions arising and dominating to those same afflictions arising less often, being weaker when they did arise. So it's through this process of being mindful of our own mind, we slowly can change our way of thinking.
And in it, that in Zadonda Nimbo de Carfungorosena, Jerem Changanzulia, Lapcha Karanangorsen, the Ring Anzulia, Chidanganzu Kiawasaya Tang, and the Divasaya Chinanganzu Kiawasaya, the some new Arusta, Divasaya de Chok, Meat Honey, Chi, Nangi, Gangi Tone Anzulia, Divasaya de Manga Yungores, the Nenza, Tanganzu, the New Yoba, the Hagovache. Then is that Jamba Tiangores or Jamba Tiangene, that the ring doing it in the bear, Yakui, Tiantelia, and the Kawaka to 2 or Chesan the Nigge, Tian Yakuyobache, Delia, and the San Yiki, Yamlingi Rimba, and the Chiki Tian Dubeke, and the Chiki Yoba Delia, Sosugi, Tersum, Comsum Jeraba, Bay Yakuri, Chesan Delia, Tingan Kiwi, Shin Yoko, Yakushu, Yobadi, that Dengi, Chola Madamache, Tiantelia, the Kiwi Jawadi. Catching with truth to a Gia, some big same shoulders, mother do sketch, and they gave a Java to the two Korea, said Tangazo Labjalmas on this word. As in Yamaja, Dijaores word.
Lama Tsongkhapa, in composing this verse, has given the following advice to us. We need to, each one of us, we need to come to recognize our own current situation, the own current quality of our mind, recognizing our abundance of non-virtue and our meager collection of virtue. And recognizing that then, take that as a determination that from right now, I'm going to strive to be mindful of my mental state. And every time I notice an affliction, I will turn away from that and cultivate rather a virtuous mind. And every time I notice a virtuous mind, I will hold that and strengthen that. And I will do so consistently, because changing lifetimes of habitual tendencies isn't going to come quickly, but it's not something that's beyond me. This is something that we are all capable of doing. What is required is consistent effort based on knowledge and consistently being mindful of our mind and slowly turning our mind away from non-virtue and towards virtue. So we need confidence, knowing that this is not beyond us, it's not beyond any one of us.
Gewe Jawa Jaya di Manga Chudu, Tibe Jawa, some Hora the Nunga Chudus, 거기 망아주 심주를 제베네 사실 개회 잡아 삼도디 망아 코려와 당주 쇼가네 야나 겨서 야 참제대 님이 인하섭지간 지금 아주 최최냐다 안디메미 겨서 곰자라서 받아 내내게 자모 뭐 중요도 제단 가사다 디레다 사이나이 님의 가시지ren야 안직 삼도디 두신 도가고 나보다에는 겨서 라가고 빼마고 중요하거든 샤라망아 중요해 제단 디네자다 소수이나 오다디링 제름제 두시 소마나시 디니기 댄상보 고가 약보 여바들이야 디리님 가시는데 소소게 개업에 먹고 살빼 약보 중성 선배게 다 가와 공고야 지다 안디니기 무디시 디니기 너는 진짜인 선배게다 샘줄 마서는 닝돌 마서는 개와야 되게 좀 차고래
If you had been over these couple of days engaging in this exercise of making piles of white and black stones, what I'm confident of is that your pile of white stones would have been much larger than your pile of black stones. And if you had been doing it last weekend in your regular life, then you would have probably had less white stones. So from this we recognize that in our time together, yesterday and today, and our days still to come, here, through engaging in activities such as the meditations and hearing the teachings, throughout these processes, your mind will be much more on virtue, your mind will be much more virtuous than otherwise. So therefore, in our time together, the habituation to wholesome ways of thinking is becoming much stronger. So it's important to recognize this, to rejoice in this, to develop a mind of delight in this, because we need to recognize that we can radically transform our mind. It's all too easy for us to believe misconceptions about ourselves, seeing ourselves as limited, as quite small, insignificant, whereas our capacity is immense. So in these days together, watch your mind and recognize that you have the skill to turn your mind from unwholesome thoughts towards wholesome ways of thinking, and that this is within the capacity of all of us. And this practice of rejoicing is of great importance because it gives one confidence, gives one the understanding that this is not beyond any of us.
To be delay to be dena jebu go nyeba deri zamyin sade da delay tamji yu and to be demba sesirwa jisadang zo delay sadelia yewal ma chena desen sumna chechugorida bene gewa chima lada mi go wa den delia lada mi diki sade delay sade jesa da dene delay jawadi and jan zo ge 동아 탐제단 주변 tarbi go ma sade delay choto yashu yagachi 다 데레 초도 교바데 심제 탐지교도 상요고바 토바이나 다 자주 심 냠는지 상요고바 토바나 다 데레 초도 교바데 차고르바 제자디지 데레레 숨미여바지 제자디 숨미여바인자 니 주변에 그 유디야 답람 숨용고르바다.
In this verse it says, this door to happiness and excellence, the Buddha Dharma, the doorway through which one needs to pass is that of engaging or cultivating within the minds of the Buddha Dharma. And this is through this doorway that happiness and excellence will be found. Happiness and excellence, there are three classes of these. The first is the attainment of another excellent rebirth as a human or God. A far greater result than that is liberation from cyclic existence in its entirety. And the third is the attainment of enlightenment based on bodhicitta. So these are the three different classes of happiness and excellence, all of which are attained through passing through the door of the Buddha Dharma.
gyudi juguri so sonro dang ju be da jubta somba na dang ju ge da jugo so na ga nis juguri se de da samlo ga nis dang ore se de samda da shi go ro je sa dang ju ge wa chi ma lai dang yang de lai go ba yang de mi go ba la da mi li ya ge wa le an di din de le ya di gi Chike, take you to Yoyakita, Guru Shimasona, Takarakum Gure Lamna, Tanazo Luma Yusum Yejudim Surum de that they'll had me, you, Tangazu Luma Yusu to Yejudim Surum, Tizan some Nakaras or Dangi Samlunalia, Shen Semja, so Jugme, Sembe Samloche, Stayata, Shen is and Kuma Kukume, Sembe Samlota, Shen Zuishi, Kohortan me, Sembe Samlota, and then Denigi Andushan some diet, Kanji Luma is to Yejudim Surum so at Sumbana, D Surum di Yevachimal Hada mi, Yeg, you said it did it. Tangazu Clara Muko, Toya Dondala, D Surum di Denigi, some of the Yane, Yano, Diana, Kedina, some of the Palo Letovachi, do some on a Cortova Chevena, that thing on the Surum, Yevachima, Hada Muko, Togo, Gusakore. That on the Milli Keba in a chick Mikashe, Jigge, Manzelia. Supo de Tamaba, on board the Gun, the nature, Kashila Doe, Yobokanga, shoot as Yungurwada. Denigi, Maya, on the Tungenti Yapoya, on board the Yabot and Jig Sosugi, Nutopia, Casore, Sijioba, Suedi, Gudicar Setelia, Anzuki, Yachik, me, Chanelia, Chiki Chimbataya, Gonchole, Chevufiadi, Tangazuki Chimba Secor, don't it. That Chimba, do say. Jedi, that Jimmy Yamlan Jedi, that the Kiwa Chimanga Zuka, Ladami, Kawakevene, Digi, Jebu, Digi, because a longue Hayaki did that, Ding on the Sakore, this sometimes Jimmy Yamlan Jeku or Echere. Naya Ombo Tawa, Denegi, and Sosuke, Vechike, New Sijida Yubige, Yuba Delia, and the Subinyam Jekore, Subakum Gores. Siji sent them Jik Garozore. Misuna Gobura Chajor, what the CG New and the Jinjoas server, Subic, that Denegi. Denegi, the Servo Congores, Servo Congorece. That's also Ranaki, that me, Jackie, that's also the other than Jawan Chimada Laliki or the Milky, so the Milky was not Jawacha me, Delia, to secure shows of Molam Jade, Laliki on Ladele Delegawa shows the Molam Jade, to the Molam Jawres. And the Chigi, and then to Sedelia gave Chawala, Duchin, Jeva, Junu Jevaina, Digi Tebo, Jawachimai in air, and Deshike, a Kawakev, Halakev, and Miliki, and Dendelia Yanchik, gave some of the Shuche on the Ungores. Chisadine Zada, Java Chimal Hada Miu, Denla, Sosuki Tikiavale, Dendelia, and the Longetang, Antique, Gangi, Twinking to a Ganga Mebada, Sosuki, Lugi, Ganga Tone, Ganga Meba, Digi to be a goody, and Castle Luma is usually to be Sudimson. Then, and the Jimbe Yamlenche, Sebacom, then, and Jiki Kiwi Javalia, Zunriche, then, and Gemma, Javachimada, Tata Muko, then retain Yabos Tobar Show, Sebe, Molam Javaina, D, Dash, some tidy, and Zuki Javachima, Tata Muko, Toya, Dentile, Digi, Yudi Direda, this some Dango, This some of what you get in as a call winner that Yamlenche, the Jigubena, then she simply Java, mother. I got answer Subuya watch that me, Hada Miki or Subuya watch so Jia watch Chang or in the Judo.
So to look then, so to attain any of these different results of happiness and excellence comes about independence on accumulating the particular causes. So recognizing that we have achieved this opportunity just this once, wanting then to put this opportunity to use, then we need to understand what the causes are that are indispensable to achieve these results. So looking at the first of the three different results, that of a good rebirth as a human or God, such a result has five causes. The primary cause to be reborn in the realm as a human or God is that of ethical restraint, where one restrains one's body, speech, and mind, keeps one's physical behavior, one's speech, and one's mind in an ethical manner. So here the meditations include developing the determination of not to harm others through, say, killing or stealing or lying, but ensuring that one's mind and resulting physical and verbal behavior is ethical. So there are varying practices here where one thinks of the faults of, for example, killing, and thereby develops the determination not to kill. So this cause of ethical restraint, of restraining one's physical behavior, speech, and mind, is the primary cause that leads to rebirth as a human or God. Then the additional causes are to ensure that one has sufficient resources so that one can continue one's journey of spiritual development. So the first additional cause is that of generosity. So as being born as a human is whilst of great importance, but to be impoverished, to be struggling to feed one's family and so forth, to be lacking material resources, this is a great impediment to one's spiritual development. So here, to ensure that one is born with an abundance of material resources, or lives with an abundance of material resources where they are easily attained, then one needs to accumulate the causes of generosity. The third cause to cultivate is that of patience, whereby patience is a mind that is undisturbed in the face of adversity. And the result from that is that one will be charismatic, one will easily get on with others, others will easily like you. So this is the third cause, that of patience. The fourth is that of joyous perseverance, where one takes delight in virtue, where being virtuous, doing virtuous things, one sees as pleasurable, and the result of that is wherever one is born, one will be inclined towards virtue. And the fifth cause is that of prayer to be born as a human, prayer to be born as a God. So with these 5 causes, with these accumulated, one can be confident of receiving rebirths of a similar quality as we've attained in this life, perhaps even greater. And if one has accumulated these causes well, when the time of death comes, one can die with confidence, can die without fear.
Just that do you say then to some of them or that's some that I can the Yamlin said some of them or some of the Lalenda or what. Then the need that you want to show it to Chialan and the sometimes during and Chige. Ya Shahelia, Lunga Yusum, you can Shanley, Nube Chawa Sawagine, Jigime, Soju, that the Niki Chawa Sawaki, Jigme, Sebe, some lotile, this some Stang or Reso, the next some Nata, then Yingo Diwa, some corner, some look at you Coven, the nigger that this some of the Asi Tang or Reche, no do style. Then Jimmy Yamlen Sidum, that's also some Dada war. Or that in the Narangi, Shahelia, Jige. Lü dang long ju an so su gi ji ro bo che ton ne gang gu ton ne xian li ya ji pen bei ji zhu jie ya xian li ya du xi ne ji ro bo ji yin san bei sam da ya de ro bo ji yin se bi sam da de da jin bi nyam len che ba si go re je za da ro bo ji tu da ma du se de go pra da ma ra se de ji de ne yong go re je za so su gi ro bo che de le yin ji mi ji da ji so su gi zo sam lo ton de ra le go re ma ni de ne gi 지게 로버제 진변냠내 저 제베네 소소기 아니 지게 나는 야셰비게 셈제로 쇼베네 콘줄리아 지게 칼라 지게 콘줄리아 대 콘줄리 펜비 삼다제 칼라제 알아서 받아 내 그거 제게서면 디멘비게 단 녀홀여비게 자로지 지우로 이게 콘줄리 칼라제 알아서 받아 엔디메게 부신나다 디네 부로 망고와 제술라 칼라제 알아서 봐 디네 야미 미교부 아 지금 Denigi Tolia, Anjimilia, the Robotia, Anjimimenji, Dendalia, Robotia, La Sobatia, Anjiconcholia, Chebupuya, and Chebupia de Jingan Medo Rupiada, the Neti Yanja Puya La Sobada, and Denigi, then Anzuki Dushin, the Jingan Mandi Puan, as you Sosuke, Dushin, that Jigi, Bear Massig launch at the bottom of photos of you, as you Mevache, Sanget, and Jajusama Chassan Puyus, the Nigi sometime Puya, Jebin, that Jimmy Yamlet, now was some Delia. Lu logic, so some Shalia Pembet, Tangi, some Samata. The net die against some little swing, Robert, this was you Nubel Timbik Tone, Tsongkhapa David and the Gaunt to Jed sometime today. That's Evercom said you And that sometimes did it. Shen Ying Alia Ganga, never Koro Sachevena, Power Koro Langi Me, Sambege. This sometimes the Super Power Koro Lange, Kolia, soon never chin the Power Nebe Len Nebe Lending Me, sometimes that this Super Compasser, this sometimes or just do sometimes the Nichi me ask that mission that you two in the Kodutelia, Dambong to the next some dance Shavena, Koduchi Michili to the social 6 of Lavena, Lamsa, part 6 to Lama to Malavache, and then Several comes to do Pa Lem Majab Lego, my young, so young corner do or the Dilego Mare, in a social corner Malamache, corner Malamache, in the corner like your Malesi or corner like your man, Pa Nibel and Chico Malesi or the several comes, did not do in a chair, the others. Then Sundry some said, Muti Nekidina to Yasi chair, that the name to Molam Jadi, just not the Mazuki Duchine, that Molam Jadu, Montadiva Japshan, you are doing it to get Kawasabadi, Delatin and Yawachima, Milia or Topchi Delia, and Yamaya was here our show, and Yawadia, Jitiki and Delia, and Yamaya was here, the Shania Pondo Chetugayo, Chigon or show, the Niki, some Daji, Monan Javaina. That Ducine, and some did it, that was some little Chando chair did it. Dijabana Javachimal had a muco, Tindile, Diku to be good, this our edge. Just a reading to get Niki sometimes the answer as J. Moody did the cash and treasure when the Cheva Yamla Cheva, that's on the Yum de Leon. Zundri said, mixing some time more delia, teach you cash and treasure when you check the Yum de Zundri de Leon.
So then how does one go about creating these causes that will lead to the result of an excellent rebirth as a human or God? Well, this comes through training the mind. The word practice, as in Buddhist practice, means to train one's mind, put various ways of thinking into practice. And so Buddhist practice is largely about training one's mind. So often the time people choose to do some meditation is when they wake up in the morning. And here you cultivate each of these 5 causes, generating the first, that of ethical restraint, where one develops the determination that today I will not harm others. I will not harm others through my physical behavior. I will not harm others through how I speak. And I will take care of my mind. I will be mindful throughout the day and ensure my mind is not being harmful towards others. Then in terms of generosity, we develop the wish to give of ourselves to others. And generosity can be expressed in many ways, not just in terms of thinking about materially helping others, but helping others with our skills or with our talents. And here just to repeat, we are engaging in meditation because Buddhist practice is about training your mind. So do not think that generosity is necessarily or solely expressed through material giving. The practice of generosity is developing a wish to give of oneself. So it's about training one's mind. So one develops this wish to give of oneself, thinking of situations where one can be of help, where one can give of oneself. And there are many ways that one can do so. So, of course, one can give in the normal way in society, give to the needy, give to charity, perhaps to medical charities, to help those in places where there isn't government support for medical treatment. It also, if you have animals at home, when you feed your pets, you are sustaining their life. So give to them with mindfulness. Be aware that what you are giving them is sustenance for their lives. Similarly, one can leave leftovers for insects and give in that way too. Sorry, the throat's complaining. And then one can also give, lastly, in the traditional ways that one learns about, in Buddhist ways such as making offerings on the shrine, offering mandalas and the like. so that one can give in those traditional ways as well as the ways generally done in society, through helping friends, helping people in need, giving to charities. But it also includes sharing our talents with others, giving our time to others. Because the training in generosity is developing the wish to give of oneself. And as with all of these mental trainings, the more you become habituated to this way of thinking, the more naturally you'll respond in this way. So for example, with ethics, you'll find, as you train in ethics, a resistance, an internal resistance to acting in an unethical manner, a feeling of discomfort to think negatively of others, let alone speak or act negatively towards others. So to a generosity, one will, when one notices an opportunity to be of benefit, one will embrace it and with joy help others. The third training, that of patience. Patience then is where one develops a determination not to allow anger to arise. Because if anger arises, there is the danger that one will respond with anger. So one can here think about the various situations where one has met or is likely to meet someone that one dislikes. Role play the situation. How can one deal with it skillfully? How to deal with the situation where someone speaks to us in an unkind manner or acts towards us in an unskillful manner. And think about, how can I respond in a skillful manner? How can I deal with this in a skillful manner? So the key point to make with patience is, like all these trainings, it's about training the mind. So patience does not mean remaining silent. Patience means the mind stays undisturbed. At the very least, the mind should not get angry. Ideally, as one trains more, the mind becomes undisturbed. Then one can respond in whatever way one deems to be skillful. It may be to stay silent, it may be to say something or to do something. But the practice of patience is for one's mind to stay undisturbed. That's the third. Then the fourth is that of prayer. One here then dedicates the virtue, makes prayers to attain precious human rebirths, so that one can continue to one's training, or to be reborn as a god if that's one's wish, to continue one's spiritual developments. Then the fifth, that of joyous perseverance. This usually does not need to be generated specifically, because joyous perseverance is a mind that delights in virtue. So here one can rejoice in one's meditation, rejoice in the success that one sees in one's daily life, and through taking pleasure in one's meditation, through taking pleasure during the day in being patient, in being ethical, in being generous. That is joyous perseverance, taking delight in virtue. So therefore, joyous perseverance often does not need to be specifically generated, but should come together with the other causes: ethics, generosity, patience, and prayer.
당은 저기 겨치마 하다 미iten에 디기 토요 유삼당 하다 냠내제데 도신의 삼당 오래디 삼당에 당하지다 투비때난 자와 잔의 고급 예바텔이야 안지 고급라와디 고급디 베주다 냠내 지고래세 지나다 나도 겨치마 하다 미 고방 투비 유 디텐텔이야 안지 디기녀의 유티게 지소래세 저 도신하자 더디로 주시와디래.
So this then in brief is how to train our mind to cultivate the causes that will lead to another excellent rebirth as a human or God.
되니게 다 인자다 두삼다마다 당하나주 가르샤 다 당하나주 미리 미자와 톱디요레 자자다 미 텐델이야 아니 지게 지 튕기에다 차상 차되 받지 아 저기 지 주님의 저 고고라도 받자기도 자자다 당하나주 가르샤베스네 개발하다 미고방 토베 규츠름소야 텐델이야 안지 튕기에 보여야돼 진배냠래 진비 대부레 진발되는 용거래 제자다 원보 차와다 되니게 최지에 냠내제데 쇠바다 하는 저기 준비 제발되는 용거래 대모름 잡발되는 용거래 셰러와다 제가 되는 인상 유되는 인상 다 되네 아주 제보된 아주를 다들 삼다베나 대지 유디게 제보디 나신게 제보된 아주 두두하다 아주 미류되래 안지 차상과 차대 튕겨 차상 상다와 최지하게 돈이 듬버여봐 안되지 최 아주게 다들 마선에 최념는 제리고요 받대 차고도와 되네게 삼다면서 당한도 디용의 유디가래 그디 주바스네 겨왕아마 주차다 주차와래 제가 다디기 류될 때네 겨왕아마기 다디 류다 다당아주게 셈기 켜서 삼단하데 삼단 두시는 될 때네 겨왕아마디랑 아주게 디기다 류가 니저도베 수줌송 안에지게 진배냠는 제 쇠보곰 되는 전주의 제제 안에 좀 몰람 잡아 제산 디테부터 당아서 될 민도요 제가 다데 두시는 안주 류딘 될 삼단여도 겨왕아마기 디기 다 야고 제바디 하고 두고 와라 당아도
So taking then what you've heard and looking then at your own current lived situation, all of us here, we've attained a human rebirth. And this human rebirth that has been attained has come about in dependence on accumulating those specific causes, which are that of ethical restraint. So we have accumulated those causes and now we are enjoying the results of that. Moreover, the material resources, the abundance of one's material resources, one's material situation, this too has come about in dependence on causes. And so looking at what one's individual situation is, one can recognize the quality of causes one accumulated in past lives. And likewise with the third, that of patience. So here, patience is varying ripening results, one of which is that one's sense powers, one's sense faculties such as sight and hearing and so forth, that these are functioning well or not, as well as mentioned earlier, our ease of getting on with others and so forth. So from this, we can judge the quality of our causes of patience accumulated in lives previous to this. Then joyous perseverance. There we look at ourselves and see whether we have an aversion or take delight in virtue. And then prayer, well, we are experiencing the result of prayer and having attained a rebirth as a human being. So in this way, by looking at our current life, our current situation, we can gain an idea of the causes that we accumulated in lives previous to this.
제부 될 때는 유여바다 하고 두고 그래서 빼는 신나길 바타를 오질래 신나길래 매여방아 좀 동구면 하고면 될이야 두어스 등기도면 다시 두어 등기여바나 될 매여래서 그러다 두어스 되냐 두어슈 등기는 다시 나기나를 매여래 그래서 두어디 매될 때는 끼는마도 매매는 두어요 하면 제가 두어디 매지고 전 두어 될 때는 매여 하고 두고 그래야지 내가 신나기도 추유매시 다른 거는 추유하고 말아 제가 신나디 바다도 남용한의 추나를 그냥 자지도와 추자. 뒤서도 균우 디와바 그디나 균우 디와 되도고요바는 디오디와 추요래서 그러다. 제가 내내기 맞지 김체 제보를 때네 한 주요바데 빠고 하고 두고래 여바 하고 두고래서 니나싱아 저기 다다 제보 체디기 류다 롱죄다 내내기 김체들 제보 김체들 삼다면 개용아마데 야고 제바 임바든 가서 하고 두고래서 그러다.
So through looking at a result, one can infer what causes were accumulated that led to this result. So just like if in the distance we see smoke, we can infer that there must be a fire, even though we cannot see the fire. Or if one's looking over a large piece of bush and we don't know where water is, but we see there's an area where there regularly are water birds, then we can judge that there probably is water over there. So similarly with our life, with our conditions in this life, we can ascertain what causes we would have accumulated in the past to be experiencing such a result now. when we also recognize that this quality of our life and circumstances amongst the immensity of beings, what we have each achieved is really quite remarkable, what great good fortune we have. When we recognize that and realize it has come about in dependence on the causes we have accumulated in the past, we can recognize just that our capacity, that in the past we've accumulated the causes to have a rebirth, which amongst all the classes of beings is really quite a remarkable rebirth. We can then infer that we have the capacity to achieve really supreme causes again.
지상 조지기 가르송고라서네 ngama 강치 다디 류라 되스 ngama 강치 다디 류라 되스 치마 가로 아니 다디 셈라 되스 지상 제왕 아마 개와 제대 야고 제대 미도 다들 류를 되다 하고 그래서 다들 류 소속에 다지 대시세 바나지 미리된 톱텔에 튕겨 야고 좀 개왕 아마디 야고 제바 따래 지상 개와 야고 주요래서 다 치마 강도 다들 셈나 되서 개와 침바 내가 손을 두고 뒤에 안 된들 하다 미고만 끼게 소소 삼나라 가르고도 삼나나 되셔서 그래 지상 소소 삼나나야 대신 한 저기 명한 예주도 출연 소화다 진배님네 쇠배님네 전례님네 제바이나 개와 치마에 미를 두고래 하다 미고가 토그 된들 두고래서 제 삼나나야 시산리야 채와 장지 산리야 지 고거다야 주인시야 소저지야 디베자와 견야 삼나 코르지 제리고 요번에 되는 안선을 차고래 시자다 개와 치마 안선 두고 뒤에 된들 두고 다들 소소 삼나나야 냠면 카르도 될 단 하고 그래서 그러다
Lama Atisha said that if we look at our current body and circumstances, we can identify what we did in the past. And if we look at our mind now in this life, we can infer what circumstances await us in the future. So therefore, taking this, being mindful of our own mind, seeing whether it is dominated by afflictions or by virtue, we can gain an understanding of what our future lives are likely to be like. Therefore, being mindful of our mental state, we then can take this as motivation to ensure that we keep our mind virtuous, we keep our mind from being dominated by afflictions because of the ripening results that will follow.
다디 지버로 와당한 저기 지게 돈도를 삼다베나 지간 저 힘도를 애벌로 시위네 제가 애벌 지려도 니 애벌이 신유신 가르치게 봐서네 그 신디 제부 될때네 그 계획이 신디 하고 두고 와 제가 그 신디 하고 도 신디 수연디 간에 스탑이나 디 하고 두고 와 제가 대등한 저 제부 신도 애벌 지어봐이나 구시 지어봐이나 니기 계획이 유 신디 하고도 신디 통면나 다 제부 될때네 어디고 되네 신디를 개발해서 신디 하고도 신디 계획에 사번에 어사번 되네 스탑하래서는 제부 될때네 그 유사원지다 하고 두고도 와 단 유만 따야 될바 어 되니시 사번 되니 스탑나 제부 되니 용그래 사번 되니 단 제부 되니 용그래서 사번 따야 될때네 제부 용에 대한 보투야 차기도 와 제가 되니 자 지부지게하러 왔다가 저기 제가다 들릴래 때네 개왕아 마카르시아바 개와자와 하고 도야다 다들 셈을 양아서 개외자와 냠는 제야디 제번에 개와치마 하고 용도 부터 다들 지부지게하러 차도로 와다 저다마도 지버로 와다
If one is holding an apple, one is looking at a result, a fruit, and this would have come from a cause, and we, without seeing it, we know it came from an apple tree somewhere. And if one wants to have many apples in the future, then we know, I better plant some apple trees, then I'll have many apples in the future. So in the same way, by looking at our own circumstances now, we can infer the causes that we accumulated in the past. And by looking at the quality of our mind in general, we can recognize the causes that we are accumulating and therefore the results that will be attained in the future. This then we use as motivation to take care of our mind and to ensure it's always on the side of virtue.
야, 나한테는 오늘 막 Diang du dina bumba chawashi, Ningbo mepe jawa matana, Lu so ye ne, Gaimang manju ne, Gyube dunga suye, Napar nuis.
Then coming to the 9th verse. So the 9th and 10th verse, the translations changed, and I think it's on the board there. At this time, at this place, if meaningless activities which are like winnowed husk are not abandoned, you will remain in the lower realms for eons after this body and life cease. Who has a capacity to forbear this unbroken continuity of suffering?
This is that Dingdu dina bumba chawashi, Ningbo mepe jawa matana sida, Ningbo mepe jawa sadi. That Ningbo mepe jawa di, Mazugi dedirwa, Shen Lia Nube Chea, Shen Gohortaya, Shen Yit Gosu Rosun Chea, and the Chiki Shen Yit Kumakuya, Shen Lia, and Zewataya, Shen Soju Chea, this is Lega Jawa de Ningbo mepe jawa. Ningbo sen Jebu de Yakuyo Marsi, rather Ningbo said, Jebu Yakuyungo Mar, this will di Ningbo mepe jawa is. That is Bumba Chawashin, Bumba sitting on Jugi, Jail Mason, Jagi Papa de Wada, Jada, the Papa de Bumba de Gore. Chisadi Nangi Jadi, Ningbo, Ningbo Chang Saiba Pandoyo. Papa de Saloma, the Yushagora Bumba, and Dina Shimpa Chawashin do cinema, Bango, Meva so, Mel, and the Jay said, Jagi Papa de Meva Session, Jay Len Sagurwa, and Dina Shin, and the Papa Meva Seva Nashin, and that it. Ningbo mepe jawa, digbe jawa che dige chasan pa mewa suyo resu, digbe jawa pa tanggo re, banggo resu, tanggo re se de ma tang na, ane karshi resu, ma tang bayi na di nya beju tawa je bayi na digba sawa, di debu, ane nga zu dunga yungo re, di zang de tanggo re esi achi go re. Chisang nga zu dengdu se de tata, nga zu deringi, nga zu dusu tela ya se go re, dusu tela, nane 지게 분바 차와 나신 안데 지게 니보메 베 자와 디게 마 안데 메가 소고래 빵고래 지 자와 지교 말해서
Look at the first two lines. At this time, at this place, if meaningless activities which are like winnowed husks are not abandoned. So here we should understand meaningless activities to refer to non-virtuous activities. Things such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, deceiving others, and so forth. These are how we should understand meaningless activities to be. So just like the husk on grain or on rice, it has no nourishment and is abandoned. So too, we should abandon non-virtuous endeavors which lead only to future suffering. So from this time, from today, from this place, make the commitment that I will abandon all non-virtuous ways of thinking, acting, and speaking.
다 분바 차와 분바 세딩 아주 제다 되네 쪽에 빠빠들 분바 라거와 다데 경화 주게다 내수디 차와 세데 하고 말와 내가 디와 미신다 자자와 베다 안저기 이말리기디와 같이 왔으네 제 빠빠당 저디기 빠빠 둥제 빠빠 둥구와 둥세베 제래 안에 같이 왔으네 되네가 자제 두신 루하고 용사 갈래 두시 지 루거데 차와서 그래 차와서 마 유거래 되네 용도 주디 마사디 빠빠데 룽기 파 현在초실에 키주거래 제산 두신이 매바 곧 예월만 주당 빠빠니디 되네 예와 치거래 제스 당보 빠빠디 마 둥둥둥둥 안 간섬 질려 두시야 케진 룽 마두신 루요 차와선 두시 루요데 되네 하베기 빠빠디 파비 주디 마사 되네 예와 체지 주디 수케 빠빠 파비거 제산 분배 차와신선 두신의 라베기레 샤르진 차르진의 라베 분배 파비 매와 수도와스 카 닝보데레 매와 카 수도와 디나시 저기 디베 자와 개와티게 파제 디베 자와 레가 자와 닝보 요말 디 닝보 매와서 판도 매와서 디양 파 매와서 방고레사지 시고레.
So this illustration perhaps needs some explaining because your experience here in Australia is quite different from where I'm from up in the Himalayas. We still farm in traditional ways. So when we cultivate rice, it has its husk, and to remove the husk, we cannot use machinery. We don't have the machinery like you have on farms here. Rather, the rice is taken and beaten against the rock, and then it's held up and dropped. And as it falls, the wind blows away the husk separated from the rice grains. And we keep repeating this process of beating the rice grains, then dropping it from a meter up, and allowing the wind then to blow away the husk. So this is how we separate the husk from the rice. We unfortunately have no machinery to do that. It has to be done with physical labor. So with that visual imagery, it's very clear that what has no value, we should just allow or just discard in the same way that a wind will blow away the husk of rice.
Then you saw Yen said that the answer Lada down to meet and top chair, Dunga, Jake, meet the to word in a dentelia, Nimbo Mibechawa, Dipi Java, the Matawa, Dil, Lared, Dipi Java, Janya, Jevaina, and the Luso Yanes, and you meeting on the Shiru Grace, Yard, Mabachar, Yard, Shiru Grace order. She do, and the Kawaki Lana, that generally gave my depot and Gaoma Sabanja, Depot and Savanza, and the Nandrol Maki Reche. Nandrol Kigris. Nandrol Kine, the Nandrol Delia Kawasa, Shu Gumbode, and Divi de Shabana, Divi Javadine, and the Conros had as Savachedi, Yane and the Ligio Baza, then the Divi Javadinema, Yashine, Nandrol Kiache, Dusin, Kawa Mambu. It's Mambo, in Ringuane, Yang Andreleke, Yashi Andreleke, who's in Gamang Andrene, said that, Gabrielia, and Dundreleke, Gabrielia, and the Ida like Dene Gabrielia, Nyawa like Dene, and Andrene, Gibi, Dunga, bottom of my young chigres, Chesa Denige, Dunga de Nakbar news, which is Ganes Setu Marwas, Dunga Noy, the Setu Marwas, Setu Mares, Chesa Denige.
The verse continues, you will remain in the lower realms for eons after this body ceases. So this then is a reminder that death will come for all of us. When and how, this is completely unknown, but death will come, and when death comes, our karmic imprints propel our next rebirth. And if those imprints are dominated by non-virtue, then we'll fall to the lower realms. And as mentioned this morning, if one falls in the lower realms, or being born in the lower realms, struggles to accumulate virtue, struggles to be ethical, and thereby accumulate the causes to be reborn out of the lower realms. The great loss of falling from the higher to the lower realms is that one ends up there for eons, taking rebirth after rebirth, in lower realm rebirth after lower realm rebirth. And then the fourth line, who has the capacity to forbear this unbroken continuity of suffering? The further great tragedy of rebirth in the lower realms is the immensity of suffering, whether one's born as an animal or a spirit or in the hell realms. The suffering is incomparable to what humans experience. And this is continuous, as if unbroken.
Adadi some dana to Stangore said in Anzilia, Simjuche, some dana de Legorba, Jesa some dana Gartor, or Daddy Anzi Dibi Java Jabana, Nasolaki, Adi de Langason Dibi Java, Nason, you didn't do one chicken Nason, then Le Matara, Jacadina, Nason, that do I, you wish you younger Chassa, the net young Kaleshi, Kadunga, Canis, Suture, Tisa, Dunga, the young Tusa Marawa, some big. Duce some died, Chesatang Anson like a woman, Chesan Anson like you, Tibet Chikimindu some begeta, Ducine, some tache, Tibet Java, the Pangina, Lunga is Yeju Domia, that Chikimes, Chesan Ducine, Tibet Java Chikimes, and be some down or Ducina some time, the name some time Tibet Java Chikimes and be some died, the Gavarwada. Gavachima Dindriki, Guchayono, Duchin Page some down or essay. She's not Duch Dambo, Duchin, some Tanya, Nodri, Maton, Nodre Della, I didn't say Apomindu Sibe, Delia, Nodre Della Madragi, Tablam de Samnoti, Lunga is in Egypt to be Sudum Soy, the essay, Sumor essay, Sumora. 돈다인 보티래 지난 변는 와서 뒤집어로 하다가서 모자 땅에 모자 땅에도 된 마도네 야고요 말디를 줘서 야고 매바다 하고네 아니 된마 야고 요새들 삼당지 땅고로 예 줘서 야고 매바다 하 먹어지 된 마땅로네 양조에 양아요로 제가 디네 장은 저기 바 지모자 땅에 땅에도 줘서 람가디 야고지 하고 하지 되는 바 땅에 노트마 쇼바 야고 슝거래 나저 쇼네 되는 마 지금 조사대 노트에 가서 람가이 규매바다 하모고시 어디 이 야구인지를 삼 조사배네 되네고 대 강아태야 돼 용거로 와 제가 되네서 지부지기하다 삼다당에서 개와 치마 조사대라야 조사 람갈 마소나 디체네 야고요래 디체네 야고요 말세베 야구 유매의 람가디 따다 야구 하고 봐네 되네 야구들 줘야 그냥 배치고로 와 제가 디에자디 하고 가야 돼 삼두스당 걸 나오면 되네 하고 그래서 그래
The purpose of this meditation here is to develop the determination to take care of our mind, to have the sufficient determination not to allow our mind go towards a non-virtue, but to keep it with on virtuous ways of thinking. Because if one falls to the lower realms, one will suffer so. And none of us wants to suffer, none of us wants to do anything that is going to bring about even more suffering. So this meditation is to develop the strength of mind to abandon the meaningless, in other words, to abandon non-virtue. And the way this is done is through cultivating, or is firstly, to see the faults of non-virtuous ways of thinking, and then using that as motivation to discipline our mind, to ensure our mind stays on virtuous ways of thinking. And in this way, by seeing the faults of non-virtuous ways of thinking, we want to abandon that way of thinking. So when our mind is complaining and criticizing and being negative, we have the motivation to break that continuity by turning our mind towards wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking, the opposite way of thinking. So then in those same moments, instead of creating causes to fall to the lower realms, we're actually creating virtuous causes. Because when we think of the faults of a non-virtue, this comes together with a determination to think in the opposite way, to act thereby in the opposite way. And in this way we cultivate virtue. So an illustration could be, often if you want to arrive at a destination, there are different routes to get there. And if you know one road currently has a lot of roadworks on it, you won't take that route, you'll take another route. Because you've seen the faults of that particular route, you'll rather drive on another road. So too, when one clearly sees the faults of non-virtuous ways of thinking, even if it's something one is greatly habituated and therefore does easily, one will strive to break that habit and rather develop contrary, opposing, wholesome ways of thinking.
데네게 소소게 녀마싱이 매나야 데네게 주시 배제 다도 남가 된제 되는 마 주고로 어디 나신데 남가 된해데 개와치마 사다 미고모 토에게 남가디 디레다 세데 마노 된해디 디로 책으로 당아도 디 남된 제르미치 손셔에 상계다 디네 남된 제디 마서 남가 된해 다 주시에 잘라나진 지구지기야 책으로 와
in the not too distant past, then before GPS, then one was very reliant on others, often had to go on a journey with a bit of a hope and a prayer. Whereas now with GPS, one can get anywhere and it's kind of easy. And so in this way, we can look at this advice from Lama Tsongkhapa as being like our own internal GPS, in that we know what to abandon, what will cause suffering, and rather what to engage in, so as to attain lasting happiness.
지상 추림수 샤네야 류가 유숨 샤네 네버 지금에 선배 추림수 왔네 네 냠는 제가 제배나 디기 저기 소수게 샹레 미네보마 소수게 레가로 가르치면 정부용이다. 미국어 마다바 레가에 지속에 쉬쉬나 레가 정부용이야. 야구용이야 지차거로 봐. 아니 진비념는 지도 소수게 당원에 소수게 lon주고네 샹레 판도야. 아니 lon주면나 소수게 레가에 돈에 샹레 판도야. 되니게 샹기 소교야 되나래 샹레 판도야. 상당히도 진비에 샹레 팬도고 봐. 랑기 팬도 샹레 판도 아니 제가 판도 세바 공면도 소수게 샹레 코로 말아가지고 소수심 시대 등자 용거로 디네 유제 제사다 샹레 판도 레가 정부 제다 전에 미현대는 어디 미디야고도 레가 정부 치기래 미배하고 미현대 고용 밀리아 로봇 치기래 네 판도 콜레 삼로 배하고 열다서 미 되가래 거로 받아 진짜 되가래다 디네 가서 라야게 삼마다 베네 되가 레고로 받아 안주 디마토 베네다 샤나치 타로 미디 통만요 베네 암조도 미디 되네 미배하고로 봐. 그 정부래도 와. 그 레가 되네 지 레게로서 미 정부로 배하고로 와. 사지 안주 미기 통만요도 뭐마신 베네 되네기 땀디 튀어도 가라. 그 걸이야 갈랑나지게 차거로 받아가서 제사 니기 랑기 되네 제바지기 밀리아 갈랑나지게 삼로스나 투에 기투고네 밀리 디기 두고로 받아. 제사 랑기 셰 랑기 되네 집에 게 밀리아 디기 두야다. 미 셈리아 시디 두야디 아주도 냠는제나 밀리 셈리 시디 두야다. 디기 두야. 데 용거로 봐. 소소이네 소소 개와사 개와치만 디기 두야다. 소소리아 안디지게 거소리 미 뛰어가야다. 소소디 제 소소 야구도라는 수이나 차상 가기로 와. 야구민들라는 가기 말어 봐. 제사 되네자 소소 디기 내가 삼다나 되네. 개와치마 삼다나 되래. 당한저 탈바다 탐지 캠표 고마 서였던 규사발라야 마지디레다 다지딩한 저기 수rim소야다 쇠버곰야 아니 진배 냠내지야 안전주 좀 디서 맞아래 디 강라야 아주 냠내 태워지네 탈바도 규사고 걸 제산 디수 매바 냠내 맞아봐 탈바 탐지 캠표 고마 토도 규사야 가요 말 제산 디 다대신 저기 딜마 슈비게 냠렌제도 진짜 삼다 제베는 소소 삼나려 대시쇼 대시셰바나시另外是你就对不起，今每身边三落的样呢样多大呀，所以这个旅游就该说的这个旅游团呢，现在偏把港土的这个身边三落大呀，俺那现在啊，你把这把他菜话这把说说了，就刚刚看这边呢，怕空手浪去，怕那边来的一个每身边空手浪个每身边的都三大呀。俺都是呢，俺这那个给别家你们这被压迫的，说是给你们这把的压迫的，都能去就每天的接近身边三大呀。第四三大的给的，给全部当个就你们这第三大的，第四三大的一个这查这个大你到什么的，今天阳性这样用的结果了吧的，阳性也是这样的，三路女不切入过大概这类，阳性这样的三路女不切入的那个，那你们这里。给的呢，什么地讲也里头看切过了，的里头给的呢，两个也不讲也差头的。我都现在那个就是什么都讲过了，也是这样这个的人学个大，在这个在这个立这个年龄节的的，的样子样呢，样子给的呢，但给的呢什么大的的，其实俺就什么的俺就是搞着呢，的那什么大的古毛学一个什么运动要嘛的，米炒一个什么腿要嘛的，在所以个是不搞着本呢。这个切着什么的切着，给的那当初搞完那当初什么的，那俺这个卡拉塞的那什么当初六去对吧？那两个六的那什么当初上学那就去做当对那的那个什么当的，这对了大家姐，这个话说过，这俺这个国好学去所以个别学单位呢，肯定别学单的当然有点吧切过，这俺这样那样的什么当的给去做这个地的当这个。
To summarize then what we've been looking at, firstly, remind ourselves that the very purpose of Buddhist practice is to train our mind. And the foundational training, the training which is the foundation upon which all good qualities come, is that of ethics. So to train in ethics or ethical restraint, we need to see the faults of unethical behavior. And one can look at external physical behavior as well as speech, but primarily the motivating mind. So we need to recognize the faults of engaging in physically harmful behavior or harmful speech, but these always come from motivating minds. So here, in particular, look at the faults of, say, anger, of attachment, of being deceitful towards others. And by seeing the faults of this way of behaving, this way of thinking, develop the determination, that's not the person I want to be. I will be mindful and ensure that if I notice anger, attachment, jealousy, competitiveness, and so forth arising, I will turn my mind away and not allow myself to act in such a way. Then one takes the time to train in wholesome ways of thinking, such as generosity. Generosity is developing the wish to give up oneself, to be of benefit to others. Thinking of various ways where, and today I'm going to meet these people, I'm going to be in these environments. How can I help? How can I give of myself? In the training of generosity, we're training to be of aid to those in need. Wherever we can, wherever we have skills in abundance, to give that to others, to share that with others. The third training, that of patience, this is where we train our mind to stay peaceful, no matter what situation we encounter. So with all of these trainings, such as the three that have been mentioned, ethics, generosity, and patience, it's useful to engage in actual role plays of experiences that you've had or are likely to have, especially in the immediate term later that day. How best to deal with these situations, how to deal with them skillfully. Because what we are trying to do, so the synonym for meditation is habituation. So we're trying to become habituated to wholesome ways of thinking and thereby acting and speaking. So role play, circumstances, how to respond, how skillfully to respond. And by doing so repeatedly over a sustained period, your very way of thinking will start to change. And this you may be the first to notice, or you may hear from others who notice. And in this way, you'll start to see your interactions, or your relationships rather, with others starting to change. That you'll be recognized as someone reliable, as someone trustworthy. People will find you easy to get on with, and they'll have confidence in your company that you won't take your moods out on them. If you're having a bad day, you won't let that influence how you interact with others. So in this way, you'll, with far greater ease, live and work with others in harmony. These trainings that I've been looking at here, ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance, these are the very foundational trainings required to later apply the additional trainings that are required for liberation and enlightenment. If one has the aspiration to gain liberation from samsara, to become a Buddha, to attain enlightenment, such lofty goals cannot be achieved without these foundational trainings. But being skilled in ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, we have the foundation, the indispensable foundation, to train further and actually attain liberation or enlightenment. So we've also then looked at the need to at all times be mindful of our own mental process and thereby resulting physical and verbal behavior. So in meditation, this is a time with less distraction to be mindful. But throughout your day, in particular when you're doing activities on your own, but also when you're with others, in dependence on your prior training in meditation, keep that mindfulness present as best you can, ensuring your mind doesn't follow the afflictions, but rather strengthen your habituation to wholesome ways of thinking. And this again, in brief, how to do so. So you see the faults of harmful ways of thinking, the benefits of wholesome ways of thinking, utilize role play, develop a strong determination to break habitual patterns and to develop new habitual patterns. And include in this the confidence that in past lives you accumulated the causes that have led to this remarkable rebirth. Therefore, any feeling of inadequacy, any feeling of it's difficult to break these habits, it's too difficult for me to break these habits, it's beyond me, those are mistaken perceptions. We have so much more ability than we generally give ourselves recognize that we have. And then lastly, an indispensable requirement is to train our mind repeatedly over a sustained period, not just sporadically. With any skill in life, we do not pick it up immediately and become masters immediately. It takes repeated exertion over a sustained period. And so too when changing long-held habitual ways of thinking. So therefore, by having confidence and applying ourselves repeatedly over a sustained period, transformation will come.
Ore, dadi nganzoki diniki nyamlen chela dangbo kunlong del masone dangbo da ngansong go dunga dele da tarogudu tarne kewachimal hada mi ko togudu sambege di dondala ni di nyamlen jigu yesembe dangbo kunlong di samtaje dos nyamlen jigu khres.
The motivation that with which we engage in our training is of great crucial importance. So in the context of what we're looking at here, to have the motivation, I do not want to suffer anymore, and certainly not to fall into the lower realms. Therefore, I will engage in this meditation now, and I will continue with mindfulness throughout my day to create causes that will ensure I gain good rebirths and do not fall into the lower realms. So thank you. Then we'll conclude there for this afternoon. Thank you.